Meet Tamara Dolan. She was the Senate's curator during the early stages of the project.
When we look around the chamber, we can really see signs and symbols of the history of Canada.
That meant her job was to make sure that the Senate's collection of paintings, sculptures, ceremonial objects, and heritage furniture were all protected during the center block rehabilitation.
So the Senate's collection includes around 6,000 pieces, of which 1,000 were in center block prior to the closure. They're definitely the most significant pieces within the collection, like the Senate mace, as well as the furniture in the Senate chamber, the thrones, a number of artworks, portraits of the French kings, and of course the monarchs and consorts.
Before center block was closed, this collection of British monarchs and consorts lined the walls of the Senate foyer. In this painting, King Edward VII is portrayed. He came to Canada as Prince of Wales in 1860 and laid the cornerstone of the original Parliament buildings. King George V reigned from 1910 to 1936. And here we see Robert Swain's painting of King George VI, Queen Elizabeth II's father, who was sovereign during the Second World War. He was the first reigning monarch to set foot on Canadian soil when he toured Canada in 1939 with Queen Elizabeth, the future Queen Mother. This portrait of Queen Elizabeth II was painted in 1957, 5 years after the beginning of her reign. It's by Canadian artist Lilias Torrance Newton and is one of 2 original paintings displayed here. The other original is this full-length state portrait of Queen Victoria. Painted in 1842 by British artist John Partridge, it was acquired to hang in Montreal's Bon Secours Market, which briefly housed the Parliament of the Province of Canada. It's been rescued from 4 fires, including the 1916 fire that devastated the original center block.
Because of the size of the paintings, there was a certain challenge of getting them out of the building. So we worked with Public Services and Procurement Canada, as well as the Canadian Conservation Institute. And conservators were actually brought to center block and did condition assessments of the paintings. We determined if any conservation work was needed in order to remove them from the building, because whenever we're moving something, you're introducing a new risk to the painting. What we then did is we created mock-ups of the sizes of the largest frames, and we actually used those mock-ups to walk the different routes out of the building to see, would it be best to go out of the loading dock, would it be best to go out of the front door? So then that way, on the actual date of the move themselves, the paintings were removed from the walls. We typically took the painting out of the frame itself, and then we would remove the frame and remove the painting and bring them to their final location.
Dolan and her team faced an even bigger challenge with the removal of these 8 historic paintings. Scenes from the First World War are depicted. They have hung here since 1921, and yet these paintings were not originally designed for this space. When Center Block was officially opened on February 26, 1920, the Senate chamber was still under construction. This photo was taken inside the upper chamber. There was still much work to be done. Just under a year later, the opening of the 5th session of the 13th Parliament of Canada took place, here in the newly built Senate chamber. Painters, carpenters, and decorators worked all night to ensure that the room was ready. Many of the elaborate stone carvings and woodwork had not yet been completed, and these paintings were installed to cover the plain walls. Originally intended to be displayed in a dedicated war memorial building, these paintings became a permanent fixture here. They have dominated the walls of this chamber for over a century. And now these paintings are being removed for safekeeping and restoration. They will be stored at the Canadian War Museum.
When we think about Centre Block, the original building burnt down in 1916 when Canada was off fighting in the First World War. So as we look around the design, the memories of the First World War and the importance of paying tribute to the sacrifices of soldiers during that time period is really important. Within the Senate context, I think the war paintings are probably the most important tribute that we see and really serve as a reminder to senators when they're doing their job in terms of who they're there representing and the sacrifices of Canadians and why we have to protect our parliamentary democracy. The paintings aren't all the same size, but in general, they're about 10 feet high by around 15 feet wide, give or take a little bit, which exceeds the size of the doors. So it was quite a challenge to actually get them out of the space. We worked closely with the War Museum as well as Public Services and Procurement Canada and Fine Arts conservators in order to develop a strategy for removing them from the building. The entire scope of work took about 2 months to complete, and what we had to do is build scaffolding within the Senate chamber to access the paintings. Then 2 at a time, they were removed from the walls, placed down on a large stretcher, and then placed flat, and we actually had to remove the paintings from the stretchers, roll them on large tubes and take them out of the building, which was quite a lengthy process, and it's something that you want to make sure that you're doing properly not to cause new damage to the paintings themselves. Overall, it went really well and everyone was quite happy with how the work went, but it certainly was a challenge given the size of the doors and the size of the paintings. And we just wanted to make sure the significance of those paintings is maintained so that they can go back into Centre Block when the Senate is ready to return.